blood soaked through pristine white sheets. A loaded Sig Sauer P226 lay tucked beneath a hospital mattress. Dante Corrado, the most feared syndicate boss in Boston, woke up with 3 bullets in his chest and murder on his mind. He swore to slaughter the traitor who left him to die. Never realizing the overweight, overlooked woman changing his bandages was the only reason he was still breathing. The rain in Boston hit the reinforced glass of St. Agatha's private care pavilion like bullets. It was 3:00 a.m. on a Tuesday, and Nurse Chloe Jenkins was exhausted. Her feet throbbed inside her worn-out clogs, and the thick, suffocating fabric of her size 3X navy blue scrubs clung to her back. She was a big woman, heavy-set, with wide hips, a soft, prominent stomach, and thick thighs that chafed after a grueling 12-hour shift. In a world obsessed with angles and perfection, Chloe was unapologetically round, soft, and entirely invisible. And invisibility was exactly what you needed when you worked on the 4th floor of St. Agatha's, the unofficial medical sanctuary for the O'Rourke and Corrado crime families. The double doors of the trauma bay crashed open, shattering the quiet hum of the ward. 3 men in soaking wet, blood-stained tailored suits wheeled a gurney forward, shoving a frantic orderly out of the way. "Get Dr. Harrison, now!" roared a man with a shattered nose and a visible shoulder holster. This was Tommy O'Rourke, the ruthless right-hand man of the Corrado syndicate. Chloe didn't panic. She moved her heavy frame with surprising speed, stepping into the chaos. "Dr. Harrison is in surgery. I need you to step back so I can stabilize him," she ordered, her voice cutting through the shouting. Tommy glared at her, sizing up her doubled chin and the broad span of her shoulders. "You? You're just a nurse. Do you know who this is? A bleeding man with a collapsed lung," Chloe snapped back, snapping on her latex gloves. "And if you don't move, he's going to be a corpse." Lying on the gurney was Dante Corrado. Even pale and drenched in his own blood, the man was terrifying. Sharp jawline, dark, unruly hair plastered to his forehead, and a chest covered in intricate, dark tattoos of ravens and family crests. He had taken 3 rounds to the torso. One missed his heart by a fraction of an inch. For the next 6 hours, Chloe stood by the surgical table, assisting the on-call trauma surgeon. She handed over clamps, monitored the crashing blood pressure, and wiped away the blood that seemed endless. When Dante was finally stitched, stapled, and transferred to the VIP recovery suite, Chloe was assigned as his primary caregiver. She was chosen not because she was a brilliant nurse, though she was, but because the men in suits didn't look twice at her. To the Corrado Mafia, a fat, plain-faced woman was part of the medical machinery, not a threat, not a spy, and certainly not a distraction. 2 days later, Dante woke up. It wasn't a peaceful awakening. His eyes snapped open, dark and vicious, like a cornered predator. Instantly, his scarred hands reached for the IV line buried in his forearm, intending to rip it out. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," a calm, weary voice said from the corner of the dim room. Dante's head snapped toward the sound. The sudden movement tore at his stitches, and he let out a sharp, guttural hiss of pain. He squinted through the haze of morphine and adrenaline, his gaze landing on Chloe. She was sitting in a vinyl chair, a clipboard resting on her large thighs, a half-eaten protein bar in her hand. "Where the hell am I?" Dante rasped, his voice raw and gravelly. "St. Agatha's. You were shot 3 times at the Charlestown Navy Yard," Chloe stated, setting her clipboard aside and walking over. She loomed over his bed, her shadow casting over his face. I need to check your vitals. Don't fight me. Dante's eyes narrowed, sweeping over her figure with raw, unapologetic scrutiny. He was used to the company of lithe, statuesque women, socialites, Russian models, women who starved themselves to fit into a size 0. He looked at Chloe's round face, the deep dimples when she spoke, and the heavy weight she carried so solidly. He let out a dark, breathless chuckle. Are you the bouncer or the nurse? He mocked, a cruel edge to his tone. Chloe's expression didn't change. She had heard it all before. The fat jokes, the dismissive sneer. She didn't flinch. She reached out with her soft, plump hands, firmly grabbing his heavily tattooed wrist to check his pulse. Her grip was strong, uncompromising. I'm the woman keeping you from bleeding out into your lungs, Mr. Corrado, she said evenly, her thumb pressing against his racing pulse. My name is Chloe, and if you make a move to tear those stitches, I'll strap you to this bed myself. Understood? For a second, absolute fury flashed in Dante's eyes. Nobody threatened the head of the Corrado family. But as he looked up at this heavy, unbothered woman, he realized she wasn't bluffing. She wasn't terrified of him. She was just annoyed. Tommy, Dante gasped out, ignoring her threat. Get Tommy in here. Now! Visiting hours are over, Chloe said, adjusting his oxygen tube. Get my men, or I'll burn this hospital to the ground, Dante snarled, grabbing her thick forearm with a sudden, violent grip. His fingers dug into her flesh. Chloe looked down at his hand, then back up at his face. I'll page him. But if you touch me again, I'll increase your morphine until you're drooling on your pillow. She pulled her arm away easily, leaving Dante staring after her as she waddled out of the room for the first time in his life. Dante Corrado had been put in his place, and by a woman who didn't even fit into the narrow, glamorous world he ruled. A week passed. Dante's recovery suite had transformed into a war room. The smell of antiseptic was replaced by the scent of black coffee, expensive cigars, and blood money. Chloe went about her shifts silently, changing IV bags, checking monitors, and replacing his bandages. She moved heavily but efficiently, her thick rubber-soled shoes squeaking against the linoleum. Because she was quiet, and because she was overweight and conventionally unattractive by their ruthless standards, the mobsters treated her like a piece of furniture. They didn't stop talking when she entered the room. That was their first mistake. It was 2:00 a.m. Chloe was adjusting Dante's blood pressure cuff, while Tommy O'Rourke stood at the foot of the bed, a rolled-up architectural blueprint in his hands. It was Isabella, boss, Tommy said grimly, refusing to look at Dante's face. The ambush at the Navy Yard. She fed your schedule to the Rossi brothers. They paid her $2 million. We found the wire transfers. Dante's jaw tightened so hard, Chloe thought his teeth would crack. Isabella was his fiancée. A stunning, razor-thin Italian heiress with a fiery temper and a supposed fierce loyalty to him. Are you sure? Dante's voice was lethally quiet. Yeah. But here's the crazy part, Tommy frowned. The Rossis left you for dead in that warehouse before they torched it. Someone dragged you out, down 3 flights of metal stairs, through the alley, and dumped you on the street corner right before the fire trucks arrived. An anonymous call from a burner phone tipped off our private ambulance. Dante stared at the ceiling, his chest rising and falling heavily. Isabella, he whispered, a twisted smirk forming on his lips. Tommy looked confused. You think she saved you? Of course she did, Dante sneered. She set me up, realized the Rossis were going to kill her next to tie up loose ends, and panicked. She dragged me out of that fire to play the savior, to buy her way back into my good graces. Dante reached up, touching a piece of gauze on his collarbone. I remember the smell of her vanilla perfume. I remember someone tying a silk scarf around my shoulder to stop the bleeding before I passed out. Beside him, Chloe's hands completely froze. The digital blood pressure monitor beeped loudly in the quiet room. You okay there, nurse? Tommy asked, narrowing his eyes at her. Fine, Chloe said, her voice slightly strained. She quickly unvelcroed the cuff from Dante's arm. Blood pressure is elevated. You need to rest, Mr. Corrado. I don't need rest, Dante hissed, his eyes burning with a demonic hatred. I need a gun. I'm going to find Isabella, and I'm going to put a bullet right between her beautiful eyes. Chloe turned her back to them, organizing her medical cart with trembling, pudgy hands. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, so hard she felt physically sick. Vanilla perfume. A silk scarf. Dante was wrong. Terribly, fatally wrong. It hadn't been Isabella at the warehouse that night. It had been Chloe. She had been taking a shortcut through the Navy Yard after buying vanilla-scented body lotion from a late-night pharmacy. She had seen the black SUVs, heard the gunshots, and watched the mobsters drive away, leaving the warehouse in flames. Chloe wasn't a hero. She was a tired, fat nurse who wanted to go home and soak her feet. But she couldn't leave a man to burn alive. She had run into the smoke, finding a massive, heavily tattooed man bleeding out on the concrete. I was heavy, over 200 pounds of pure muscle. But Chloe had spent years carrying the weight of her own body, lifting bariatric patients, moving with a grounded, hidden strength. She had hoisted Dante Corrado by his armpits and dragged him. She dragged his bleeding body down the metal stairs, her thick thighs burning, sweat pouring down her face. When they reached the alley, his shoulder artery had been spurting blood. She didn't have a silk scarf. She had ripped off the cheap polyester blue scarf from her hospital uniform and tied it ruthlessly tight around his wound as a makeshift tourniquet. She made the anonymous call to his men from a dropped burner phone she found on a dead guard, and then she vanished into the night, terrified of the Mafia. Isabella hadn't saved him. Isabella had just taken the credit, weaving a lie with a fake silk scarf to save her own skin. Nurse Chloe. Dante's deep voice shattered her spiraling thoughts. She jumped, gripping the edge of the metal cart. Yes? Dante was staring at her, his dark eyes piercing right through her defenses. For a terrifying second, she wondered if he could see the truth on her sweaty, flushed face. But he only saw a nervous, overweight civilian. Tell the kitchen I want a steak, rare, he ordered dismissively. And don't interrupt my meetings again. Right away, sir, Chloe mumbled, practically fleeing the room. As she pushed through the heavy double doors into the hallway, she leaned back against the cold tile wall, gasping for air. Her scrubs were clinging to the sweat on her large stomach. She was trapped in a nightmare. Dante Corrado was going to slaughter his fiancée for a betrayal she absolutely committed. But he also believed Isabella was the one who had dragged him from the fire. If he found Isabella, the lying woman would undoubtedly spin a web of deceit, claiming her love forced her to save him, using Chloe's actions as her shield. Isabella might even manipulate him into killing someone else. Worse, If Dante's men ever pulled the security footage from the street corner 2 blocks away, they wouldn't see a petite, glamorous Italian heiress hauling their boss to safety. They would see a heavy-set woman in size 3X scrubs. They would find Chloe. And in the Mafia, leaving a witness alive was a sin, punishable by death. Chloe looked at her trembling, plump hands. She had 2 choices: keep her mouth shut, remain invisible, and let a Mafia bloodbath consume the city, or step into the crosshairs of Boston's deadliest kingpin and tell him the truth, that the woman he was hunting didn't save his life. The fat, invisible nurse he insulted every day did. 3 weeks after the bloody ambush at the Charlestown Navy Yard, Dante Corrado discharged himself from St. Agatha's private care pavilion. I was still healing, his ribs tightly bound and his breathing shallow. But a syndicate boss could not afford to govern his empire from a hospital bed. The Boston underworld was already whispering about his weakness. He needed to make a statement, and that statement would begin with the execution of the woman who had sold him out to the Rossi family. However, Dante's medical condition required constant monitoring. He refused the private visits offered by the family's associates. Instead, he demanded the one person who had treated him with 0 reverence and absolute efficiency, Nurse Chloe Jenkins. Chloe had tried to decline. She cited hospital policy, exhaustion, and her heavy workload. But when Tommy O'Rourke placed a stack of $100 bills totaling $50,000 on the nurse's station counter, and softly mentioned that refusal was not a survivable option, she packed her worn-out duffel bag. Now Chloe found herself standing in the shadows of a sprawling, heavily guarded penthouse overlooking Copley Square. The opulence of the safe house was staggering. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows, Italian marble floors, and velvet furniture. Yet to Chloe, it felt like a gilded slaughterhouse. She wore her usual oversized navy blue scrubs, the fabric stretching comfortably across her wide hips and heavy thighs. Her thick, comfortable clogs sank into the expensive Persian rugs. She felt entirely out of place, a plain, overweight civilian trapped in a deadly Mafia chessboard. Dante sat in a high-backed leather armchair in the center of the living room, a dark mahogany cane resting against his knee. He wore a tailored black suit that concealed his bandages, looking every inch the ruthless kingpin. The air in the penthouse was thick with tension, smelling of expensive bourbon and the metallic tang of polished firearms. "Is the perimeter secure, Tommy?" Dante asked, his voice a low, gravelly threat that sent shivers down Chloe's spine. "Completely locked down, boss," Tommy replied, pacing near the entryway. "Boston Police Commissioner Michael Cox has his officers swarming the South End, looking for the Rossis, but they aren't looking here. The local precincts are on our payroll. We have absolute privacy." Dante nodded slowly, his dark, calculating eyes locking on to the elevator doors. "Bring her up." Chloe stood beside Dante's armchair, her hands trembling as she adjusted the dial on a portable oxygen machine. Her heart hammered against her ribs, the frantic rhythm threatening to expose her panic. Isabella was coming. The stunning, treacherous fiancée was about to walk into the penthouse, and Chloe knew exactly how this interrogation would unfold. Isabella would use the story of saving Dante as a shield to survive. And if Dante believed her, the real savior, the fat, invisible nurse trembling by the oxygen tank, would have to live with the guilt of letting a master manipulator win. Or worse, she would have to speak up and risk Dante's wrath. The steel doors of the private elevator chimed softly. Two heavily armed guards stepped out, dragging a thrashing, hysterical woman between them. Isabella Rossi, formerly Isabella Valenti, before her secret alliance, was breathtaking, even in captivity. She possessed a slender, model-thin frame, sharp cheekbones, and long, raven-dark hair that cascaded down her back. She wore a torn designer dress, and her flawless face was stained with mascara tears. "Dante! Oh my God! Dante, please!" Isabella shrieked, falling to her knees on the marble floor the second the guards released her. She crawled toward him, her manicured fingers clawing at the rug. "They kidnapped me. The Rossis took me after the warehouse. I thought you were dead." Dante did not flinch. He did not reach out to comfort the woman he was supposed to marry. He simply stared at her with a terrifying, vacant calmness. "Did they, Isabella?" Dante asked softly, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal glass. "Because Tommy found the offshore accounts, $2 million wired from the Rossi family to a shell corporation in the Caymans, a corporation registered under your maiden name." Isabella froze, her beautiful eyes widening in sheer panic. The blood drained from her face. "No. No, Dante. You have to listen to me. It was a setup. They forced me to give them your schedule. They threatened to kill my sister if I didn't cooperate. I had no choice." "You always have a choice," Dante countered, his voice dropping an octave. "You chose to walk me into a firing squad." "But I saved you!" Isabella screamed, playing her final, desperate card. She pushed herself up, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "When the Rossis shot you and set the warehouse on fire, they left me to die too, but I didn't run, Dante. I stayed for you. I dragged your heavy body down those metal stairs. I hauled you into the alleyway while the flames were burning my skin. I saved your life." Dante's jaw tightened. This was the one variable that had kept Isabella alive this long. The debt of his life. "You dragged me?" he asked, his tone unreadable. "Yes, I carried you to the corner. I tied my Hermes silk scarf around your bleeding shoulder to stop the hemorrhage. I smelled your blood, Dante. I stayed until I heard the sirens, and then the Rossis' men chased me away. I am the only reason you are breathing." Chloe's breath hitched. Her hands gripped the plastic edges of the medical cart so tightly her knuckles turned a stark, bruised white. Isabella was a phenomenal liar. She was selling the story with tears, passion, and absolute conviction. Dante leaned forward, his dark eyes searching Isabella's weeping face. "You tied your silk scarf around my shoulder." "Yes, to save you," Isabella sobbed, reaching out to touch his knee. "Get away from me," Dante hissed, pulling his leg back as if she were venomous. He looked up at Tommy. "Check her arms. She says she hauled 220 pounds of dead weight down 3 flights of stairs. Let's see the bruises." Tommy stepped forward, roughly grabbing Isabella's pale, slender arms. He inspected her wrists, her shoulders, and her back. "Nothing, boss. No strain, no rope burns, no bruising. Her muscles are perfectly fine." Isabella panicked, thrashing against Tommy's grip. "I had adrenaline. I was running on pure adrenaline because I love you, Dante. Please, you have to believe me. I left my scarf on you." Dante sat back, a shadow of genuine conflict crossing his face. The Mafia lived by a strict code of blood and debts. If Isabella truly saved his life, executing her would violate the fundamental laws of his syndicate. He looked frustrated, his hand instinctively rubbing the healing bullet wound near his collarbone. The scarf was ruined by the blood, Dante murmured to himself, his brow furrowing in concentration. But I remember. I remember a strong grip. I remember the smell of cheap vanilla. Chloe's stomach plummeted to the floor, the Bath and Body Works. Warm vanilla sugar lotion she applied every night. Isabella seized the opening immediately. Yes, vanilla. It was my perfume, Dante. My expensive vanilla perfume. I held you so tight. Chloe couldn't take it anymore. The audacity, the lies, the sheer manipulation radiating from this cruel, slender woman made Chloe's blood boil. Isabella was a parasite, feeding off the bravery of a fat, exhausted nurse who had risked everything. Without thinking, Chloe stepped out from the shadows of the medical cart. It wasn't a Hermes silk scarf, Chloe's voice rang out, shockingly loud and steady in the cavernous penthouse. Every single head in the room snapped toward her. The silence in the penthouse was deafening. The armed guards tightened their grips on their assault rifles. Tommy O'Rourke stared at Chloe as if she had suddenly grown a second head. Dante slowly turned in his leather armchair, his dark, dangerous eyes locking onto the heavy-set nurse. "What did you just say?" Dante demanded, his voice dangerously low. Chloe's knees were shaking under her baggy scrub pants, but she forced herself to stand tall. She carried her weight with newfound defiance, stepping squarely into the light. She looked down at Isabella, who was glaring at her with absolute venom. "I said it wasn't a Hermes silk scarf," Chloe repeated, her voice gaining strength. She looked directly into Dante's fierce eyes. It was a cheap blue polyester blend, hospital issue, cut from a standard size 3X nursing jacket. And the knot used wasn't a delicate fashion tie. It was a tactical square knot, double-looped to compress the subclavian artery so you wouldn't bleed to death on the asphalt. Isabella let out a shrill, mocking laugh. "What is this? Who is this fat, ridiculous cow?" "Dante, why is the help speaking to us? Kill her! She's interrupting." "Shut your mouth, Isabella," Dante snapped, not taking his eyes off Chloe. His heart was suddenly racing, a strange electric realization washing over him. He stared at Chloe's wide shoulders, her sturdy frame, and the strong, capable hands resting at her sides. Hands that could easily haul a grown man out of a burning building. "Explain yourself, Nurse Chloe," Dante commanded. Chloe reached into the deep pocket of her scrub top. The guards instantly raised their weapons, laser sights dotting her chest. "Stand down," Dante roared, waving the guards off. "Let her speak." Chloe pulled out her phone. Her hands were sweating, but she unlocked the screen and pulled up a photograph. "I didn't want to get involved. I am just a nurse. I know what happens to people who cross your family, Mr. Corrado. But I cannot stand here and watch this woman lie to your face to save her own life." She walked forward, ignoring Tommy's suspicious glare, and handed the phone to Dante. On the screen was a picture Chloe had taken of herself in the hospital locker room the night of the shooting. She was covered in soot, ash, and Dante's dark red blood. More importantly, half of her blue uniform jacket was violently ripped off, the exact fabric that had been found wrapped around Dante's shoulder. "I was walking home through the Navy Yard after my shift," Chloe explained, her voice remarkably calm now that the truth was out. "I saw the SUVs. I heard the gunshots. When they drove away, I ran into the warehouse. You were bleeding out. I dragged you down those metal stairs because I am used to lifting heavy patients. Isabella wasn't there. She was long gone." Dante stared at the photograph. The timestamp matched the exact minute the fire department was dispatched. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over Chloe. He remembered the heavy, steady footsteps. He remembered the unyielding, powerful grip, hoisting him up by the armpits. He remembered the scent of cheap vanilla lotion, not expensive French perfume. The pieces clicked together with devastating clarity. The woman who had saved the most feared mafia boss in Boston wasn't a glamorous, high-society heiress. She was the quiet, overweight, unapologetically real woman standing right in front of him. "You lying bitch!" Isabella screamed, lunging at Chloe with manicured claws outstretched. "She's lying, Dante. She's a jealous fat pig trying to steal my credit." Before Isabella could reach Chloe, Tommy intercepted her, slamming her hard onto the marble floor and pinning her wrists behind her back. "Tommy," Dante said softly, handing the phone back to Chloe. He didn't look at his fiancée. He only looked at the nurse. "Take Isabella to the docks. Make sure Commissioner Michael Cox and his detectives never find her body." "No, Dante, please! I love you! I'm your wife! Dante!" Isabella shrieked in absolute terror as Tommy and the guards dragged her, kicking and screaming, toward the private elevator. The heavy steel doors slid shut, cutting off her frantic screams. The penthouse fell into a heavy, profound silence. Dante slowly pushed himself up from his armchair, leaning heavily on his mahogany cane. He walked toward Chloe, his imposing height towering over her. Chloe braced herself, unsure if the mafia boss was going to thank her, or silence her permanently, to keep his vulnerability a secret. Instead, Dante stopped inches away from her. He looked down at her round face, the soft curve of her jaw, and the fierce, uncompromising bravery shining in her eyes. He had spent his entire life surrounded by fake, plastic people who smiled while holding knives behind their backs. For the first time, he was looking at someone completely authentic. "You risked your life for a man you knew was a criminal," Dante said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Why?" "Because nobody deserves to burn alive alone in the dark," Chloe answered honestly, refusing to shrink back. "Not even a monster." A slow, genuine smile spread across Dante's scarred face, transforming his terrifying demeanor into something strikingly handsome. He reached out with his free hand, his heavily tattooed fingers gently tracing the soft line of Chloe's cheek. She gasped softly at the unexpected warmth of his touch. "I've spent years choosing women based on how they looked on a magazine cover," Dante murmured, his thumb brushing over her deep dimple. "I chose revenge. I chose power. But I was blind. You saved my life, Chloe. You owe me nothing, yet you gave me everything." Chloe swallowed hard, her heart fluttering wildly in her chest. "I'm just a nurse, Mr. Corrado." "No," Dante corrected softly, leaning in until his lips brushed against her ear. "You are the woman who saved the king, and from this day forward, no one in Boston will ever look past you again. You are under my protection. You are mine." Chloe looked up into his dark, fiercely possessive eyes, realizing that her days of being invisible were permanently over. The mafia boss had finally seen the truth, and he had chosen the curvy, courageous woman who possessed the one thing his brutal world desperately lacked, a real heart. Did Dante's brutal revenge and unexpected romance keep you on the edge of your seat? If you loved this intense mafia drama about loyalty, betrayal, and a fierce, curvy heroine who defied the odds, please hit that like button right now. Do not forget to share this video with your friends who crave thrilling suspense. Subscribe to our channel and click the bell icon so you never miss a gripping real-life story. What would you do next? Comment below.